listening to the Philanthropisms podcast with Rodri Davis. Hello, you're listening to the Philanthropisms podcast. This is the podcast where we try to put philanthropy in context. I'm your host, as ever, Rodri Davis, and this week I'm joined by two guests. I'm joined by Milos Maricic and Giuseppe Ugazio. Now, Milos and Giuseppe are the editors of a new volume, the Routledge Handbook of Artificial Intelligence and Philanthropy, that's just come out, which I should say, full disclosure, I have a chapter in, and more of that in a bit. But I was delighted to be joined by Milos and Giuseppe to talk about the new volume, and also just sort of more broadly about the whole question of the intersection of AI and philanthropy, which is something I'm very interested in. And I attended a conference that Milos and Giuseppe organised early this year in March in the University of Geneva, which was linked to the book as well, and we'd sort of touch a little bit on that in the conversation. So just a bit of background before I sort of tell you what to expect in the podcast. So as well as being editors of this volume, so Milos himself is an expert on AI and an entrepreneur. He's also the founder of the Altruist League, which is a global network of sort of ultra high net worth people and foundations that uses AI to try and kind of make their approach to philanthropy as effective as possible. And Giuseppe is the Edmond de Rothschild Assistant Professor in Behavioural Philanthropy at the Geneva Finance Research Institute. And he also leads a project on artificial intelligence and philanthropy at the University of Geneva as well, which has been running for a little while now, and is how the Routledge Handbook came about as a publication. So I sat down with Giuseppe and Milos fairly recently. We had a really good wide-ranging conversation. So as I say, we kind of talked a bit about the Routledge Handbook, how it came about, what the aim was, what some of the content, and how they'd sort of decided on the themes within it. But we also talked kind of more broadly about AI and philanthropy. So we talked a bit about what are some of the interesting and exciting examples of AI currently being used directly to try and kind of achieve social or environmental missions, and how we should be thinking about those. We also talked about how AI could be used within philanthropy itself, so both to kind of understand philanthropy more effectively and to map it and to kind of be able to spot patterns and make predictions potentially, but also how we could deploy AI in various ways to make philanthropy, quote unquote, better or more effective, and what some of the opportunities were there and some of the challenges potentially. And we also talked about what some of the barriers are currently to getting philanthropy to use and adopt AI effectively. Some of those barriers in terms of the availability and the quality of data, the lack of knowledge about what AI is and how to use it, the difficulty often of having the resources, both in terms of financial resources and time to invest in this, and whether that means we need to put more focus on partnerships between the not-for-profit sector and the for-profit sector, and what some of the challenges in that might be. And we also talked about some of the kind of known challenges with AI as a technology around the way it can be used for misinformation and disinformation, its tendency towards creating or exacerbating bias that already exists in data, and also the challenges that it might present to kind of identity and trust in the online environment. So lots of subjects covered. So without further ado, let's go into the conversation. I will be back at the end for the usual bit in housekeeping and tidying up. I'll also, I think, add a little bit where I'll just talk briefly about my particular chapter in the Routledge Handbook and just give you a bit of an overview about that in case you're interested, and then you can go away and read it for yourselves. So I will be back at the end to do that. Okay, great. Well, I'm here with Milos Maricic and Giuseppe Ugazio. Hi to both of you.
Hey, Rodri. Good to be here.
Hi, Rodri.
Yeah, well, great to have a chance to talk to both of you. I mean, we've kind of been in the same room before at various times and talked quite a bit about various topics, but the topic of philanthropy and AI, which is what we're here to talk about today. And I guess the starting point is the hook for this is that you have both co-edited a new volume that's come out, the Routledge Handbook of Artificial Intelligence and Philanthropy, which is a big volume with loads of chapters in it that have been contributed by all sorts of authors covering lots of fascinating insights and perspectives on AI and philanthropy. So maybe the best starting point is just for you guys to say a bit in your own words about why you were interested in pulling this book together, what the thinking behind it was, and what the process was, and so how you went about structuring it.
Thanks a lot, Rodri. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about this book and the research project more broadly. So the original thought of putting this book together was seeing how much AI was sort of catching up. That the idea for the book came up before all the big explosion with ChatGPT and so on that put basically AI in everybody's mouth. But it was really realizing how little awareness there was in the philanthropic sector about AI. So you had the niche actors, and Milos and his organization being one of them, that were really savvy, really knew a lot about AI and really exploited the potential of AI a lot. But then if you turn your head to the rest of 99% of the sector, you would see that they were very either scared, not even thinking about it. They never thought about it. They seldomly even realize how they could benefit from it, right? So we thought, Milos, you have a lot of experience. You've been using it forever. You've been advising philanthropists thanks to AI. From our side, we've been researching how to use AI to build tools that could help philanthropy, say mapping different actors. That's one of the projects we have. Why don't we get together and bring experts in these two fields to start a dialogue and try to bring them back together, right? If you think back at the origins of AI, a lot of the first movers were actually philanthropic organizations, right? But then it didn't really explode. It really stayed in this niche. So then the idea was, okay, let's try to do some capacity building, spread a bit of knowledge, show people how AI is being used in philanthropy, so that maybe more will be interested and then catch on to it.
And Milos, what's your kind of ambition for what people reading the book might take out of it? Philanthropy practitioners who are interested in this topic, they come to the book. What can they learn? What can they get out of it?
I guess what's really fascinating for me is how bi-directional actually the relationship is. So there is one aspect of the relationship that has already been established. We've seen AI used in philanthropy for many years now. Let's say on the nonprofit side for finding better donors and maintaining relationship with them, communication and so on. Then on the side of the donors, calculating risk, calculating impact, doing better donor grantee matching. So this is something that we are increasingly used to seeing, but there is that other direction that I think the book is probably the most fascinating aspect of the book for me, which is what can philanthropy do for AI, and that's maybe something that I'd like to accentuate, because philanthropy has this fantastic opportunity to be a neutral convener. We are all parts of different AI debates. We know how difficult they can be and how many different points of view. And philanthropy has a role to play there, and then also simply by funding organizations that inform citizens about their rights with regard to AI, that protect the public interest, for lack of a better expression. So I think it's only when the book was completed and when I actually read the final version of it that I came to understand that twofold bi-directional relationship, but now I see it as probably the strongest selling point, so to speak, of the book.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that you're right. There's that. I mean, bi-directional, maybe even tri-directional. In that, I sort of look at it, and you're absolutely right. There's that bit which is about the way in which philanthropic organizations or non-profits are using AI. And then there's the bit about how they are potentially informing wider debates and influencing the direction that AI is being developed. And maybe there's a bit in the middle, which is how are philanthropic organizations themselves being affected by AI, even if they're not the ones driving the implementation of it. And I think the book covers all of those different things. I'd love to pick up on all of those. I guess maybe let's take the sort of the optimistic utopian bit first, which is often the bit that's kind of front and center. What are some of the examples of nonprofits involved in applying AI tools directly to kind of their cause areas that you found most interesting and exciting?
I think I think the results are in, so to speak, and they have been in for the last couple of years. And I think we're at the stage at which it's no longer a matter of talking about individual examples, but we actually have statistics from the UK, from the US, that are showing that NGOs that use AI, and there's a panoply of platforms out there that use AI or purport to use AI to help nonprofits find better donors. I mean, there are very conclusive statistics by now that are showing that these organizations are spending, up to 30-40% less time to capture to capture up to 20-30% more donations in some cases. And then in terms of donor churn, the statistics are also looking good in terms of retention, in terms of that improvement of communication, so increasing the number of touch points and so on and so forth. So I think what's actually the most encouraging for me is that it's no longer a matter of saying, hey, I know this organization that's using AI and they're doing great, but it's more of it's becoming a massive trend where if you're not using AI, you're missing out. That's the way maybe I would frame it.
Maybe to build on Milos, what you're just saying, and bring an example or two examples from the book. We have this chapter by Marta Herrero and Shona Concannon, where they discuss how you can enhance basically fundraising thanks to AI, right? And specifically, they look at basically the digital methods for fundraising, which is of course where AI has the largest potential, can really be used to get a deeper understanding of your donors or your donor base, and then build sort of a storytelling line that is sort of more appealing to them, right? That's sort of for the fundraising, and then in a way to sort of bring actors together and try to coordinate efforts, which is one of the themes also in our foreword by Professor Floridi, where he's actually seeing one of the largest potential for AI is really to help people collaborate more together, organizations collaborate to achieve, very important aims, for example, of, addressing some of the SDGs or contributing towards some of the sustainable development goals, right? So that where you need concerted efforts to really make a difference. You need a systemic approach where you can bring the different people together and map how they contribute, right? And then we have this chapter by our friends from the let me just get the right name so that don't make it rhyme. Is Catalyst Balkans, where they use large language models, right, to map in this European region who's working on what, and produce then a taxonomy of the philanthropic organizations there and the initiatives going on. And this also, I guess, resonates with what Milos is doing with the Altruist League, right, of finding people and organizations and match them based on interest or moral values or other dimensions. And maybe Rodri also brings back to mind your chapter, right, on how you can use AI then to look at the individual donors, right, and you can sort of get a more comprehensive picture of that to understand if I remember correctly, the how, when, and where they will want to get engaged.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should say, I might at the end, after we've finished speaking on this episode, give people a sense of the detail in my chapter. But it's essentially, as you say, about the way in which AI and particularly kind of algorithmic recommendations of various kinds can be used to inform the choices people make when giving to organizations or causes, and some of the ethical issues that there might be in doing that, because I think there are huge opportunities. But as with so many things with AI, if we rush into doing them without sort of prior thought about some of the unintended consequences, there are maybe causes for concern. You mentioned there, Giuseppe, the example from the Balkans. And one of the things I think is really interesting about this volume as a whole is that there are lots of different examples and perspectives from different places around the world. There's a really interesting chapter, for instance, on China and the way in which the sort of speed of adoption because of the rate of growth of digital giving in China has been pretty enormous. I wondered whether you had any sense from this work or your sort of wider experience of whether currently adoption of AI among nonprofits and philanthropic organizations is particularly concentrated geographically. Is it distributed well, or are there places that are further ahead or further behind? And also in terms of cause areas, is it that the areas in which there is a lot of data already are the ones that benefit, and are there other areas that are maybe being left behind?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, you're touching on one of the biggest risks or biggest downsides of using AI for everything now, which is basically exponentially increasing the digital divide, right? If you don't have data, you can't have any answer from AI. AI doesn't know a certain problem, a certain issue exists. And then if people use AI, say, to find causes they want to give to or organizations, and you have no data on it, then you'll have a big issue, right? But to come back to your point, so I think it goes really hand in hand with how much a society has been pushing for AI. And here, basically, you then would see China and the US, with the trying to really have the dominant LLM that everybody is gonna use, right? And then you see some of the largest users of AI are, for example, or promoters of AI, right? The McGovern Foundation is US based, and we actually have one chapter also from them in the book. And as you mentioned, right, China has been the Tencent Foundation and so on. They've been using AI massively, even paired with TikTok and this social media to sort of reach unprecedented levels of fundraising from individuals. So I think when a society engages a lot in promoting AI and digital technologies, then also the philanthropic organizations will sort of follow suit and also be prepared. So maybe one of the next regions that we'll see catching up on this, it's the UAE, the MENA region, just because how much they're investing already in finance and in other digital technologies. But hopefully also it will, one of the hopes is that when philanthropy realizes and tries to combat, say, the digital divide or these issues, then we'll also manage to see that regions like the bigger African continent can leapfrog and start, getting more advanced in digital and then being digitized and then using AI to help their addressing their issues, right? And we know there is quite a big network of local entrepreneurs that are leveraging AI and trying to bring AI to promote growth also in that region.
Yeah, and just to build exactly on what Giuseppe was saying, I think a lot of this is yes, society-driven, but also donor-driven. And for example, when we were starting out close to 10 years ago, our first clients were these tech-savvy founders in California who got the whole story around AI, were very excited about it, and were frankly happy to pay our prices, which were 10 times higher than the price of an average philanthropy consultancy. And so through collaboration with them, we started to deploy our first models and to get some traction. And I think this is now spreading around the world, driven by the donors themselves. So there's a certain section of donors that are very tech savvy. They're excited about AI. They're also a little bit potentially disillusioned with a certain version of philanthropy that they're seeing. So they want things to be a little bit more systemic, a little bit more trust-driven, trust-based, and so on. And these people are now, which I find really beautiful, appearing all over the place. They're appearing in Africa. They're appearing in East Asia, like you both mentioned. There's an explosion of such people over there. So the trend is in that respect becoming global. But then for that to trickle down to the local level, exactly like Giuseppe said, it will take efforts of different actors, including governments, including institutes, think tanks, and so on, for that to be comprehensive.
Just to build on your point there, Milos, is the flip side of that, and I guess one of the concerns is that there is obviously this huge opportunity around AI, and as you say, there are donors potentially that are going to drive that because they have the existing experience and knowledge of these tools and they know that the potential they have. Is there a danger sometimes if they aren't able to make the right connections with the organizations on the ground that know what the genuine needs and use cases are, that you get this kind of tech solutionism problem where people come in with the idea, I want to use AI, rather than starting from what is the actual problem and can this tool be used to address it? Have you seen that happen at all, and how can we kind of mitigate against the risk of that happening?
I've seen it happen quite a lot, actually, and I do think that it's a big problem, and a lot of it has to do with the work of the intermediaries between the donors and the causes on the ground. So if we're talking about the work with the donors, then there is something to be said about donor education, so helping them along their journey. They do come with preconceptions, with ideas about what they want to do, but then it's our job, I suppose, to talk to them, to try and shape their intention in ways that can produce impact on the ground. But the work is also there's work to be done also on the other side, because obviously one of the biggest problems in creating systemic change is that we simply don't have a perfect overview of all the causes on the ground that are worth investing into. So that's something that the Altruist League invests quite a lot of money and time into, and so we also see it as our job to first of all find those causes, to track them, to pre-select the best ones, the most impactful ones, the ones that can use funds the most easily, and then to make the matching between the two, all the while maintaining a certain balance in the conversation. So it's not the donor coming in and saying, "Hey, we want you to do this, and here's the money." And it's not the nonprofit either saying this is what we do, either invest or leave us alone. But to make sure there is some sort of a space there where there can be a little bit of discussion to find some mutual ground, because our job is to make sure that the collaboration ends up being not just one project, one initiative, but a long-term trust-based investment over 5-10 years and so on.
Maybe to add on that, one of the risks, the broader risks, so these are really concrete examples that Milos shared, but in general, is not only for philanthropy, right? But it's for any use of the AI, when we use it to substitute instead of complement, right? If you're asking AI, which cause should I support, is really the wrong answer, the wrong question, right? Because then you get answers that will be biased, that basically just reflect the same or even amplify, right? The same bias, like searching for a missing object under the light and not where the dark is, right? The AI will just point at different points in the light, but then when you want to do is actually find out in the dark places, where should I point out my flashlight to find these better solutions? And that is probably not what AI can do. AI can tell you maybe what type of light you should be using, or which angle to take, or how to once you have identified partners, what could be some sort of good ways to interact or to develop, which tools you could use to make sure the interaction is efficient. But it's really this the broader issue of substitution that sometimes when we become lazy, and if you the same when you answer an email, if you ask AI to answer the email rather than just polish your English, right? Or at least not yours, Roger, but mine. And that's what you can use AI for. You shouldn't really use it for substituting yourself.
And in the context of the possibility of using AI to apply it to sort of philanthropy as a system rather than specific cause areas, and kind of make the allocation of resources more effective. As you say there, Giuseppe, if you just did that without giving sort of appropriate thought, first off, the danger would be that you would it would kind of reinforce existing biases. You'd only know those things that and it wouldn't be able to kind of tell you anything outside of that sphere of knowledge. But if we want to be able to do something more interesting with it, I guess the starting point is, do we need then the data on philanthropy at a kind of more universal level rather than in silos? And how far are we off making that a reality? I mean, what more is there to be done to create a data set that allows us to do something meaningful at a kind of systemic level with philanthropy as a whole?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I think we're very far, and I think there is an endemic issue with philanthropy. And the first one is there is a big lack of transparency, right? What the information you get, first of all, is only success stories, right? You try to find an annual report or a project report from a foundation or an NGO that said we failed. So that's the one side, right? And then what you see in this report is sort of the tip of the iceberg, is like the most appealing projects that then bring you good visibility and so on. But then you don't really have the exact data or the concrete data that you can then maybe share. So to prevent someone else from failing, they already see that your organization took this approach and it didn't work, and then I either find out by failing myself, or it'd be great to see this, right? So unfortunately, at the moment, we're quite far. But I think the more we see the benefits, for example, from science, from open science, of sharing data, and there are safe ways to do it, right? It doesn't just mean throw everything out there and let everybody use everything. It means, there are ways to share data in an appropriate way so that it can be, very efficient and constructive. So when we do it properly, then in other fields, hopefully philanthropy will see as well the benefits of sharing data. And I hope we will move in that direction. And to this end, we're collaborating with Philea, this umbrella organization of philanthropic organizations, to promote Data Commons initiative at the upcoming ERNOP conference. Is this European Research Network on Philanthropy, will be next year in September. And we'll try to have a conversation with researchers and with philanthropists on how and what we need to build a data commons for philanthropy to make it, that it's anonymized, it's safe, it's stored in appropriately, and so on. So that then we can hopefully start with a few volunteers, organizations sharing the data and maybe generating, look, this is a report of what has been working, not working, how much funds have been given, and these are areas that people are not working on. And it's only based on 1% of organizations. Imagine if we had 90% of organizations, what a much more rich picture we could get, right? But unfortunately, we're still at the very early stages. And I don't know, Milos, if in your experience you've seen.
Yeah, maybe two things to add, plus a bit of a big picture overview. I guess, yeah, one striking thing when we work with donors is always how different what they actually do ends up being as compared to what they say that they do. for not, I don't mean to say it in a bad way, but it's just something that seems to be a practice around philanthropy. So the public persona is one thing, and then you actually, after a lot of trust building, actually look at their investment history, and it shows you a slightly different picture, which is either, like Giuseppe said, slightly less successful, or perhaps slightly less coherent, and so on. But it's at least the beginning of a discussion. On the side of the data set of let's say NGOs or citizen movements and so on, there is an absolute shortage of that. And there again, maybe as an entrepreneur, I see a problem, because if I think about my company, that is probably the core of our added value, right? So it will be very difficult for somebody in my position or similar organizations out there to simply share that indiscriminately. But then, like Giuseppe was saying, there are ways of sharing that can be a win-win, because you can mask data, you can share some parts of the data set, and so on. So there are definite opportunities for collaboration there. And the last component of what I would like to say is a slightly different perspective, because your first sentence in this question, Rodri, was about general AI use in philanthropy and where it's headed. And for me, it's quite simple. I don't think that we can afford not to use AI in philanthropy in the future. And the reason is very simple. We are working with increasingly complex data sets. So we are working with donors that whose investment history spans thousands of organizations, where we are working with a data set of potential candidates, which might have hundreds of thousands of of organizations in there, and so somebody needs to make a matching between the two. A human can no longer do it, and so it's a simple necessity. And then if you throw additional components that add complexity, so you're trying to be trust-based, which means you want less reporting, you want to bother organizations less, and you want to leave them more to do their own work, and then you do your impact calculations and tracking and so on in the real world, as opposed to through the reports. Well, then you need analysts to do some of that manual work, but you also need AI, through all the different scraping techniques and NLP to calculate this. And then maybe the last component that adds even more complexity is we're all increasingly talking about systemic change. So not just doing one intervention, but actually working for the long term with the different layers of the society, from think tanks to village elders to social organizations and so on. So having that broad front approach, well, that adds complexity because you need to now model the actions of all those actors. And in addition, maybe as the last component, philanthropy sometimes has the tendency to act as if it was acting in a vacuum. So a funder comes into a country and says, well, this is my operation, this is what we're trying to do, these are the KPIs. Fortunately or unfortunately, more often than not, you were just one actor in an environment of many different ones, both other philanthropic organizations, government entities, social organizations, and so on. Again, something that you need to understand, model, predict, and so on. So to me, it's very simple. AI just has to be used in philanthropy going forward. It's just a matter of how we do it responsibly and effectively.
Yeah, I like what you were saying at the end, Milos, because I often say one of the most sort of pervasive and dangerous bits of thinking in the whole world of philanthropy is the myth of the lone savior. It's this idea that actually all the best change comes about because one brilliant individual or organization comes in, thinks of something nobody's ever thought of before and kind of changes everything. And that almost never actually is the case in terms of how change happens. But I think it's such a kind of, as I say, a powerful idea that it's sort of stuck around for a long time. I wanted to ask actually a bit about the role of the private sector and particularly the sort of tech sector in all of this, because I guess one of the things that I'm thinking is that if we're talking about AI usage and adoption at scale across the world of philanthropy, the reality is that certainly when it comes to designing new tools or kind of applying these tools to new areas, very few non-profit organizations are going to have the knowledge and skills and resources to do that themselves. So they're going to be reliant on partnerships with the tech sector or the for-profit sector. What do you think the potential is there to bring together the sort of profit motive within this and some of the interest of non-profits? And do you think there are kind of potential challenges also to be overcome there because there are going to be power differentials between the different organizations and maybe misalignment of values and objectives?
Yeah, maybe to preface this with just saying that another hat that I wear is as a chair of an industry organization of institutional investors, which is quite active in all the regulation discussions in Brussels and so on. So I have also that very much for-profit perspective. I think you raise a very valid point, and I think philanthropy has a role to play there. Like I was saying earlier, as a neutral convener, philanthropy has that luxury or an opportunity to be on the good side of everybody. So to understand the motivation of the tech entrepreneurs, to understand the motivation of the government, of the think tanks, of the civil society, of the ethicists, and so on, and just to bring them all together to at least have a reasonable, honest discussion. And I think this is a great beginning. Then, when it comes to the role of the tech sector in particular, so to answer your question directly, the answer is twofold. First of all, a lot of these tech entrepreneurs are also philanthropists, as I was saying earlier. So they also do it. At some level, have an interest in this technology being developed in a way that is ethical, that benefits everybody, and I think they stake a certain percentage of their identity, at least those that I speak to, on that. They want to be the people that make that happen. But with all that said, regulation cannot be obviously left to them. So I'm a huge believer in regulation. It's a very maybe mundane and an unsexy way to look at things, but we absolutely need the regulation to basically limit. To assign responsibility where it should belong, first of all, and then to limit the potential negative effects of the technology, in particular on those with the least power, so marginalized groups and just individual citizens.
And maybe to bring back also to the original question on what can philanthropic organizations, especially NGOs, do when they don't have the resources, right? So first there is always hopefully that the donor organizations can already think of including and say an AI development, or like our colleague Francesca Bosco from Cyber Peace Institute always tries to argue for, that you should also include some sort of cyber readiness or some infrastructure part in the grants, right? That we have overheads for people, probably we have overheads, maybe you also need for the infrastructure and the digital part as well. But then I don't think this is going to be such a big concern, right? Because the tools that philanthropy needs, they're tools that other industries need as well, right? Impact measurement, you need it in finance, you need it in, and you need it in philanthropy. HR management, you need it in any basically largish organization and so on, right? So I don't think there is going to be too much of a need for tailor-made tools for philanthropy that are not already developed in sort of by the market and then can be sort of brought in to philanthropy as well. And maybe the one thing that philanthropy can actually from the donor side try to promote is, trying not to have to change everything to fit the digital world, the AI world, because it would basically mean reinvent every single philanthropic organization, and maybe at the NGO level, at the communities level, that's really impossible to do, and actually promote AI that is flexible enough. Now, the problem shouldn't be that it's me not using properly the software. The problem is the software is not adapted to me, right? It's I shouldn't be finding way arounds to trick the software and still use this AI tool when I can't, but other because it's really a rigid tool, but it should actually be a more on the AI developer side to find something that fits the existing world, so that we don't have to change everything we do.
Yeah, just to maybe reinforce the point that Giuseppe just raised around the similarities between the for-profit and non-profit sectors. So when we were just starting out in the Altruist League, we worked a lot with the for-profit sector as well, just to pay the bills, because they were way more receptive, and it was just amazing to see how the challenges were almost identical in terms of team building, understanding the technology, understanding what organizational changes are necessary around it so as to deploy it the most effectively. So there are huge opportunities there. 90% of what is done in the for-profit space can be, with some modifications, used in philanthropy.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to pick up on the question around sort of law and regulation as mechanisms for shaping the development of AI, because we mentioned at the start of the conversation that one of the points of relationship is between philanthropy and AI is the role that philanthropic organizations play in kind of informing that debate. And you touched on it in your answer before there, Milos, that actually maybe a couple of years ago, the debate around this focused on ideas like making AI more ethical and sort of relying on individuals and organizations to do the right thing. And that maybe that shifted more towards recognizing that even among well-intentioned actors, you just need rules and laws often to kind of govern things. What do you think is kind of the areas that are most of relevance and of interest for philanthropic organizations and civil society organizations, particularly in Europe? Because I think I got the sense at the event that we were all at in March at the University of Geneva, there was a lot of discussion there about how actually Europe feels as though it's maybe slightly further ahead when it comes to questions around regulating AI and actually taking a relatively tough stance on it. So I wondered if you kind of had any thoughts on how involved philanthropic organizations have been in that, and where they had brought influence to bear.
Well, first of all, maybe to answer the first part of your question, which was around the regulation and how philanthropic organizations should approach it. At the EU level, the regulation is now and it's in a very interesting phase, I think. So the law is, so to speak, in place, but the standardization process for the law is ongoing, and I find that phase to be crucial, because that is exactly where you will define what the legislation really means. So when you say that you need a risk management framework, what does that actually mean in reality? And similarly for other reporting requirements. So my first piece of advice would be for philanthropy simply to be involved. First of all, to understand what is going on. It is difficult enough to understand what is going on in Brussels for us who are following it full time. But I would still make an effort because there is an opportunity in many of these bodies for foundations to be simply involved in day-to-day discussions, and some of them potentially represent actually the interests of the broader industry. I know at least our friend of both of us, Sebastian Hollensleben, who chairs JTC 21, and whom you know as well. He's extremely welcoming to these external perspectives. And then we are seeing some philanthropic organizations already involved in creating fora for this discussion. For example, Giuseppe and I will be in Paris in a couple of weeks for an event organized by the Bertelsmann Stiftung in collaboration with the OECD, and the topic is going to be digital trust and digital identity. Things like how do you know that the person who wrote something or with whom you're speaking online is a human and not a bot. So that's an example of philanthropy just taking an initiative, collaborating very importantly with another organization, and creating a forum for some exchange. And then the third area, as I touched on previously, is simply funding organizations who are doing good work in the field, protecting the rights of the citizens and informing them. So organizations like Algorithm Watch and so on. So that's maybe the lowest effort, but potentially very impactful opportunity. If you don't want to be part of all these discussions, you don't have necessarily the time to attend the fora. You can direct your funding towards organizations that contribute.
Yeah, and maybe the other one, just to complete the picture, is for advocacy, right? We've seen it for any important topic that philanthropic organizations, NGOs have been quite vocal and trying to promote more legislation, right? And so that's the other way in which philanthropy can get engaged also in that direction.
And do you think, because you mentioned the question there around digital identity and sort of trust and online authenticity, which always strikes me as one of, if you're trying to convince an organization within civil society that it should care about AI when it's not, already minded to. I often find if you, start talking about the bad stuff maybe first, and the one that tends to cut through is that, because actually there's so many organizations trust that, the trust that the public and their supporters have in them, and their ability to have authenticity and to have people kind of respect and trust what they say is so vital, that when you point out that there are these new threats to that might, lead that to be undermined, they suddenly realize that it is very relevant to them. Do you think that that's one example of how we need to sort of frame some of this debate and maybe take it to the places where civil society organizations are, rather than assuming that they'll get it or that they'll be interested and kind of come to where the debate's already happening?
No, I think that's absolutely one of the most important aspects or areas in which we should really bring AI that is capable, say, for example, to help this sort of democratic forums, right, where people get together and, it could help finding consensus or extrapolate the most important points and see the different angles that people express and how to bring them together, right? So that would be a very interesting usage of natural language processing, for example. But then you don't want people to be forced to give, let's put it like quasi or semi-structured interviews, right? You want them to be able to just brainstorm, co-create, really throw in any idea that comes out, and then have the AI create sort of a structure of all the ideas, right? You don't want the people to be in the first place, have a script and try to, within this narrow script, find something interesting, because then you would actually limit the outcomes you can get, right? The quality of the outcome. I'm not sure if this example speaks to your question, Rodri, but I think that's one of the ideas that came to mind.
Yeah, on my side, sometimes I get slightly angry with all my ethicist friends who who keep sounding the alarm bell. But we do need people like that. I mean, we need people who are thinking ahead and who are trying to portray the worst case scenario if we do nothing. I think that's it's super important. And sometimes if people and, like you said, civil society organizations need the visceral motivation to act, well, so be it. It's just part of our toolkit, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I want to ask, maybe it's sort of related to that, I think a challenge that a lot of organizations that aren't, operating in the world of AI or particularly kind of within spheres of digital civil society find when it comes to understanding AI is they feel as though they need to make a judgment about how much store to place in some of the claims that are made about AI. Do you think, we've talked about the fact that there clearly are really powerful potential use cases, but there is also undoubtedly a lot of hype in the wider world of AI. How much of a challenge do you think it is for philanthropic organizations to navigate that and to understand what is real and meaningful and that they should engage with and what they should maybe, sit back a bit and wait and see? Because it feels as though there's so much heat and noise around this that it's often very difficult to make those judgment calls.
To me, the fundamental question is one of attitude, and the best attitude that I would recommend is the one that sees AI as simply a tool. So it's just a tool. It's a tool, and then you judge whether it's useful for you, whether you can deploy it in your organization. Like every tool, it comes with pluses and minuses, and I think that's simply the best way to anchor the discussion. So that immediately kills all the hype. If AI is not useful for you right now, you just don't use it. Just keeping the conversation prosaic and practical. And if I can just plug one thing, the Altruist League created a very sort of common sense toolkit for deploying AI in philanthropic organizations, in foundations, and nonprofits. And it's completely free to use, and you can download it on our website or just go to readyforai.org. And it's the point of view is very sort of pragmatic, and we believe that the initial discussion and initial sort of understanding of what AI can do for the organization, the initial kind of education of the staff, the initial communication, consensus building can take place in a week, and that first phase, the most important phase. Once it's done, then you already set on our AI use trajectory. So I wouldn't overcomplicate a field that is already quite complex for different reasons. When it comes to use, you have an organization, you have organizational goals, and if an instrument serves those goals, great, use it. If it doesn't, no need.
Yeah, I think also to complement, the good thing of all these digital tools, AI or not, is that they're fairly cheap to experiment with, right? So you can try, say, the OpenAI LLM, and if you don't like it, you can try the Mistral one, or you can, it's quite fairly cheap. The most thing you have to do is probably just to create an account and then try to just try it in the right way, right? We have a fair, cautious approach. For example, there have been cases of NGOs sharing sensitive information through these tools, not realizing that the tool is actually absorbing every single piece of data you put in. So just make the first sort of the 1, 2, 3 or look left and right approach to sort of watch out for the most important dangers and learn how to use these tools properly, and then just experiment, right? But then I completely agree that we are in a very, very deep jungle of tools that for the one thing you have 80 different tools and you have no idea which one is better or not. And for each of these, you have maybe the same number of reviews that tell you these 5 are the better ones or that 5 are the better ones. So it's really easy to feel overwhelmed and lost. But maybe initiatives like the book, right? Not to promote it too much, but saying, it's trying to give sort of some examples. This is how some people, which tools have been used, this is how some people do it, or these are the ethical principles to keep in mind, or the risks to be aware of. such initiatives doesn't need to be this. There's probably 1,000 different ones, but people can use to sort of get the started with the right foot. And it's a bit like taking a photographic course, right? Nowadays, you can take 1 million, and maybe you get lost at the second time you turn the wheel on your camera to see this function. That seems really complex. But then, if you're sort of systematic and set small goals and try to sort of have an educated approach to it, then it's probably quite easy to find the tools that can help you and to use them in the right way. So I think there's always this first move cost to pay, that it feels like you're climbing Mount Everest, but then actually maybe it's just a small hill, and then if you get used to it, then you'll be able to use the AI tools, so just losing sort of this fear.
And then just to add to that, and again, like Giuseppe said, not to over promote the book, but if the challenge is simply keeping abreast of what's going on and listening to some smart voices in the jungle, take the book, see all the chapter authors, and follow those people. And I think you're going to have a fantastic overview of where AI is headed in terms of its relationship with philanthropy. So that would be a piece of practical advice.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be a good follow list. So I think that's a good action point for anybody listening. And I guess just to round off what both of you were saying there, I think it touches on something really important, which is I think in these conversations sometimes we make an assumption that this is all about things happening at an organizational level and then filtering down. So it's about organizations and their boards of trustees deciding to adopt a particular tool and then sort of purchasing an IT solution in a relatively old-fashioned way. But when it comes to AI, it feels as though that's not actually the case most of the time. These tools are out there and are often freely or cheaply available. And so individuals within organizations are probably using them already, even if the organization is not thinking about it. So actually it's working from the ground up. So, I mean, to the point you were making before, Milos, actually, we're past the point where there's a choice about whether or not to engage with this, because most organizations need to just realize that, they need to know that their employees are going to be using tools like ChatGPT and others, even if they as an organization haven't got their thinking clear on it yet. So I think that's quite a sort of important point. And then the final question I had really was just about where things go from here. I mean, one of the great things I think about the book is that it gives a really good overview of kind of current thinking on the relationships between philanthropy and AI in all sorts of different directions. So given that, what's your sense of, what do we know that we still don't know? Where are there gaps in terms of our knowledge, and where would you like to see more research about philanthropy and AI over the coming years? Giuseppe, maybe if you take that first.
Yeah, so the first thing I would like to see is more research per se from academia in developing tools and finding ways to use existing tools to assist AI, to assist philanthropy through AI or through machine learning, other approaches that rely on big data crunching. I think that's one of the first points, right? Is trying to get more people engaged from the digital world to the philanthropic sector, and this is something that I think will happen. So the philanthropy research per se, it's quite a new, I would say, academic focus. There's only one school of philanthropy. I don't know how many business schools exist, right? As far as I can tell, there is only the Lilly School of Philanthropy. There's an entire school dedicated to that. But we're seeing more and more chairs or departments getting quite a nice attention to philanthropy. So hopefully this will also mean that the hottest trends like AI will be studied in the context of philanthropy, then providing more academic references for philanthropic professionals and practitioners then to know which tools exist and how to do philanthropy properly in a certain way or another way, and so on. And with respect to the philanthropic sector, I think also thanks to this capacity building or thanks to this realization of the necessity to embrace AI, there will be also this sector bringing in their expertise and their views on how to achieve responsible AI, how to promote responsible AI, so that it's not only up to sort of market forces that are just maximizing their own interest in most cases to develop these tools. So then basically enforce regulations or try to hone better regulations to ad hoc situations in different parts of the world and so on. So that's the two main directions that I see that should attract attention, or I hope will attract attention by researchers and professionals alike.
Yeah, on my side, I fully agree. If I can add one thing, when I think about the future of philanthropy, I see it in this triangle between trust-based giving, focus on systemic change, and the use of artificial intelligence, because if you want to do the first two, you need the third. So I see them simply as going together, and I hope that AI will be increasingly de-hyped and just treated as a useful tool as the years progress. In terms of more broadly, the trends in the industry, I fully agree with what you said, that this trend is slightly different because the benefits of AI use accrue at the bottom, not so much at the very top. But I still do feel, I mean, what I mean by that is they empower the employees as opposed to the management. But I still do feel that we will see some of the aspects of some of the previous technology trends, for example, the trend of business process reengineering and the so-called productivity paradox in the 70s and the 80s. And what we saw there was lots of investment and a certain lag in terms of seeing those productivity figures. And the reason why we were seeing a lag was because obviously you cannot just put technology into an organization and hope for the best. There needs to be some reorganization, there needs to be some education and so on. So I think executives putting AI to use in philanthropic organization and elsewhere need to be ready for that. So they need to be ready to see a certain lag in achieving those productivity gains. They need to be ready to communicate on what the vision is. They need to be especially ready to listen to the people from the ground, because they will more likely than not be the champions and those doing the most advanced experimentation with these new tools. And they need to be ready to adapt course as this wild sector of ours keeps changing as the technology adapts.
Absolutely. And I think a great thought on which to leave things. And just remains to say thanks ever so much to both of you for coming on the podcast. I'll obviously put links in the show notes to places where people can find the open access version of the book and all of the chapters contained in it. And I'll put references to links to some of the other things that we've talked about during the podcast. And just, thanks ever so much for coming on. All the best with all of your future efforts. I'm sure we'll continue this conversation around philanthropy and AI. I'm sure everybody listening will agree it's an absolutely fascinating field with loads of really interesting work going on at the moment.
It was a pleasure, Rodri.
Thank you very much for hosting us, Rodri. Great pleasure talking to you.
Hello, it's Rodri again here. And before we get into the end matter of this podcast, and I give you the usual sort of parish notices, I thought I'd just take a couple of minutes to let you know a little bit more detail about the chapter that I've had published in the Routledge Handbook on AI and philanthropy. And so my chapter is called Guided Choices, the Ethics of Using Algorithmic Systems to Shape Philanthropic Decision-Making, which tells you most of the things that you need to know about it, to be honest. But essentially what I'm looking at is the question of how can AI and algorithmic tools potentially be used to shape the choices that people make when it comes to deciding to give to good causes. And I guess the reason that I'm interested in this is it feels underexplored at the moment as an aspect of the whole question of the intersection of philanthropy and AI. It's noted, as I say in the chapter, in other areas that there's a lot of focus on the way in which AI can be used to make decisions about us as individuals, but there's less focus up to this point on the way in which AI can potentially affect the decisions we ourselves make. And the argument that I outline in the paper and the chapter is that choice is a pretty fundamental aspect of philanthropy. There's obviously a deep philosophical discussion to be had about whether philanthropy is actually a choice or a duty or a responsibility. But assuming that to some extent there is an element of choice in philanthropy because people are voluntarily choosing to give away their private assets for the public good, then I think we can kind of agree that choice is something that we need to be aware of. And we need to be aware of the factors then that influence those choices, because again, there's a model within classical economics, particularly of choice as something that is undertaken by purely rational actors who are trying to maximize their own utility or value in one way or another. But the reality is that actually choice is influenced by a whole range of different factors, both kind of conscious, subconscious and unconscious. And that's particularly true when it comes to charitable giving. And, a lot of the literature that explores this identifies multiple different things that kind of play a role in informing the choices we make. So I think choice is really important when it comes to philanthropy. As I argue in the chapter, I think choice is also a really interesting concept when you start thinking about AI, because there are various ways in which AI, I think, can affect the way that we make choices. And what I focus on in the paper is three particular ways that it can do that. So the first is the use of algorithms to determine responses to requests for information. So thinking here about, the way in which search, internet search and the algorithms that power that is already functioning, because obviously, the information that is returned to us and the form in which it is returned to us has a big bearing then on the actions that we take as a result. And I think, search is already determined by algorithms, as I think we all know at this point. I think anybody who thinks that the results you get from a Google search are just a kind of purely objective list of the most relevant things in answer to a particular search term is being quite naive. Those things are clearly determined by very, very powerful and lucrative algorithms that have been designed very carefully over time. And also, I think increasingly there's an awareness that there's a shift going on maybe away from the traditional model of search as something that returns a list of possible kind of results, and which you can then scroll through and go down to the next page, towards a model where we are being presented with answers in the form of either recommendations or things that look more like a kind of natural language conversational answers. That's already happening with online search. So you will maybe have noticed in the last 6 months or so quite a big shift with Google towards, the first result that comes up with most search terms now is a kind of potted AI produced summary explaining in a kind of, essay format or a kind of small briefing the answer to your question. And I think a lot of people will probably rely on that. And also, the more that people are using other forms of interface, sort of conversational interfaces, for instance, Alexa or Siri or that kind of thing, the more that they are then getting, answers in the form of kind of single responses or a small handful of responses rather than a long list. So I think, AI is having a very clear effect there. I think beyond that, I also look at the capacity of AI to enable a high degree of personalization and sort of tailoring of information and recommendations. And even, to engage in what's known as hyper nudging. So sort of to go beyond traditional nudge theory, where you kind of shape choices and kind of provide particular choice architectures to try and get people to do specific things or undertake particular actions. And hyper nudging is essentially the kind of AI powered, souped up version of that, where rather than a one-off nudge that you put in place, like, for instance, where you position food in a cafeteria, which is a sort of classic example in behavioral economics, you can have nudges where somebody is being nudged to do something when they kind of do undertake an activity or search for something online. But then the nudge is able to adapt and kind of respond dependent on what actions they take. So it's potentially much, much more powerful. And then the third thing that I look at is the use of AI-generated content to prompt emotional responses and drive behavior in that way. So the question is sort of how do you use generative AI and imagery and potentially sort of, video and that kind of thing in the future to try and get people to give more to charity or sort of, have an empathetic response. So I explore all of those in the paper, and essentially, without, spoiling it, what I do is kind of look through some of the potential ethical issues that these raise, in terms of, the main things being the impact that this might have on our individual autonomy and whether that is a price worth paying, particularly when it comes, for instance, to providing more tailored recommendations or suggestions. The argument would be, in the context of philanthropy, perhaps that would drive more giving and maybe it would result in more effective or better distribution of giving overall. But the counter is, if that is done in a way that undermines people's individual agency and autonomy, is that something that we should be concerned about, both inherently for itself, if we value autonomy and agency, and potentially because there are longer-term unintended consequences to that. Similarly, I think in terms of the use of generative AI, imagery and other content to try and drive emotive responses, even if that is found to be effective, what is the potential wider cost in terms of undermining people's trust in what they see and hear online, and what might the ramifications of that be for civil society in particular? And also, can we even assume that it is effective? I mean, there is a bit of research already suggesting that when people are aware that content has been generated using artificial intelligence, even if the people doing so are very clear and upfront about that, they actually are less inclined to give, for instance, in the context of a fundraising request. So I think there are reasons to be cautious about some of the kind of suggestions that we might go full steam ahead in using some of these tools in those contexts. And then to finish off the chapter, I sort of outline what some of these key ethical questions might be, and then what that might mean in terms of the response of the non-profit sphere and philanthropic organisations and policymakers more widely in terms of addressing them. So if you're interested in that, I'll put links in the show notes. Do check it out. I think it's quite an interesting paper, if I do say so myself. And if you don't, feel free to disagree with me, but do so in an interesting way. I'm always up for that. Well, that brings us to the proper end of the podcast. Just remains to say thanks ever so much again to Milos and to Giuseppe for coming on the podcast. Great to have a chance to talk to both of them. It's been really great to be involved in this project and also kind of, involved in the group that has developed around AI and philanthropy as a result of the work that they've both been doing. And certainly if any of you are part of that group and were at the conference in Geneva earlier this year, hello to you. I'll put links in the show notes to places where you can find the book itself, which I should say is currently available open access, so you can read all of those chapters online, and there are loads and loads of great chapters covering all sorts of different aspects of the intersection of philanthropy and AI, so do carve out a bit of time to do that. I'll put some links to other bits and pieces that I've written or said about AI that you might be interested in as well. If you're interested more broadly in philanthropy and civil society and you like the kind of thing that I bang on about, then do take some time to have a look through the website at whyphilanthropymatters.com. You can find all the back episodes of this podcast there. You can find lots of articles and news updates and short guides to all kinds of things to do with philanthropy, and there's many of them that touch on issues around technology. I even quite recently added a new guide on the question of philanthropy and quantum technology. So if you're interested in some highly speculative thoughts on an emerging technology and its relevance for philanthropy, do check that one out. If you're interested in more, up-to-date kind of bits of news from me, do follow me on social media or connect with me. I'm on LinkedIn at the moment. I'm also trying to use Blue Sky a bit more, so do come and find me on there and try and make that more of a party so that we can all kind of finally totally bin off X or Twitter or whatever nonsense we're calling it these days. Other than that, just remains to say like, subscribe, follow the podcast, do leave us a nice review wherever it is that you get your podcasts. Maybe tell somebody that you think might be interested in it, because I think personal recommendations go a long way. And other than that, I'll see you next time. Bye.